20th century education in Europe and America. For the first time, education in the 20th century, at least in America and Europe, was seen as a developing field of study. Just like any professional area, medicine as a field of study, dentistry as a field of study, engineering, architecture as fields of study, education was seen as a field of study for the first time in the 20th century. In the 1950s, Skinner's work with his animals and his psychological findings and publications helped reshape education in Europe and in America. These findings of Skinner led to a more understandable way of trying to teach young people. It showed a more focus on the individual interests and capabilities and potential of young people. So the 20th century saw a massive turn in education as it began to be considered a field, and if it was a field of study, what should be taught to potential teachers who want to enter this field and make a career for themselves. In 1960s and 1970s, the theories of educational research peaked because following Skinner's work, lots of other people stepped in, continued the work Skinner started, and even went off in different directions of Skinner. And so the 60s and 70s saw lots of theories about educational this and educational that coming about. It was like a bombardment of theories, and that's why it is seen as education applied or theoretical science. What is it? Should education be seen as a science, or should it be seen as a theory-based subject? Well, neither. Education is neither a theory-based subject nor it is a science. It is an amalgam of both. It's a little bit of both. There has to be some theory to study any field, and then there has to be scientific approach of trying to identify issues, problems, and then find the appropriate solutions. So the scientific method also came into education, but it was not limited to the scientific method alone. In the 1980s, we've seen development of new ideas and notions about education. We've seen the constructivist approach, which talks about construct education, construct knowledge on what students bring to the classroom. Students come to our classrooms with a foundation. Build on that foundation. Multiple intelligences, more than one way of doing and looking at things. Children learn in multiple ways. And Harvard Gardner's multiple intelligences started with 7, went to 8, today there are 9. So there are 9 possible intelligences that students could use. Which ones of those 9s do we actually even use today in our classrooms? Brain-based learning, as research on the brain developed and with more technological advances, and we began to learn more about the brain, and that brain-based research needed to be brought into our classrooms, because after all, the brain is the organ for learning. And life-based humanistic learning gained importance. Because we began to shrink and into a global village with technology, the scene changed, and it was important to understand humans as humans. So the humanistic approach or the humanistic perspective was seen as being important in the 1980s and 90s. Teacher education gained. Teachers needed to be better prepared with the changes coming about in technology. And we are talking of Europe and America, and that's where technology really took over. And so all those changes came about into schools, into our classrooms, and so teacher education needed to be changed. In 1997, educational faculties came about in universities. Okay, there was faculty of education, and the faculty of education was then responsible for drafting the program for the bachelor's and the master's and the degrees beyond that even. Education in postgraduate education. Postgraduate education is seen as important. Postgraduate is masters, MPhil, doctors, postdocs, and those kinds of levels. That education also needed to be considered. You could not now just limit yourself to graduate level education. Constructivist approach, multiple intelligences took over much more rapidly and strongly, and capital punishment was banned in schools. In other words, you could not hit students. You had to talk to them, you had to counsel them, you had to work with them, but you could not hit students. So punishment was banned from schools.